Welcome to Brussels Forum 2020. We are pleased to introduce the Vice President for Foreign Policy at the German Marshall Fund, Dr. Ian Lasser.
Good morning and good afternoon from Brussels. Welcome back to Brussels Forum 2020. And this week we're going to be focusing broadly on issues of governance, trust, and resilience in a time of crisis. And we're very pleased today to be talking about that specifically at the local level in talking about what comes next, governing through COVID. Let me say at the outset a word of thanks to our partners, to our founding partners, Daimler and the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to our forum partner, Deloitte, and to all our associate and supporting and knowledge partners. We're very, very grateful to all of them. We're especially pleased to have two governors, US governors with us today. It's the first time, in fact, at Brussels Forum, and also a Secretary of State from the Brussels Capital Region. Thanks to all of you for joining. I'll let our moderator introduce them in a moment, but let me also welcome our moderator. Juliane Schäuble is the US correspondent of Der Tagesspiegel in Washington, and we're very grateful to you for doing this, Juliane, and I'm going to turn it over to you. We look forward to the discussion. Thanks to everyone for joining.
Good morning from DC, and thank you for having me. I'm very grateful to join this super important and interesting discussion that's called What Comes Next, which I think is probably the most interesting question right now. The coronavirus pandemic has affected every single country on Earth. And on Sunday, the worldwide death toll hit 500,000. 10 million cases are confirmed worldwide in just 6 months. And almost every expert says we have not seen the worst yet, because more than 1 in 5 cases was recorded in the last weeks. All countries have struggled and still struggle to deal with this extraordinary, once in a century, we hope, health crisis, and with the economic crisis that evolved out of it. We have seen that lockdowns worked, as do social distancing, masks, and contact tracing. We saw this in extremely hard-hit places like Italy or New York City, and other cities, states, and countries were able to learn from these early hit places. And we saw that many have used their extra time well to prepare. Not every country, not every region, not every state was hit the same by these two crises, and the responses differ. Looking at the US and Europe, not every state or region had the same challenges and has the same results. So it is hard to compare, but one can learn from each other, from our successes and from our mistakes. Therefore, I'm really happy to be able to talk to 3 regional leaders who can tell us about their experiences and struggles in finding solutions to the health and economic challenges. US governors and European regional representatives are on the forefront of the global pandemic responses and recovery efforts. We are going to have 1 hour to discuss all interesting questions, and it should be an interactive session. So you can post questions on Twitter with the hashtag Brussels Forum, and I will try to include them in our session. But now let me introduce our panelists this morning. I have the governor of the state of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, with me today, who was re-elected in 2018 with 65% of the vote, more than any governor in his state's history, I've learned. Welcome, Governor Hutchinson.
Thank you.
We have the governor of Utah, Gary Herbert, who took office in 2009 and is therefore currently the longest serving governor in the US. Welcome, Governor Herbert. Good morning. And I'm also very happy that I have another European on the panel. And welcome to this discussion, Pascal Smet, the State Secretary of the Brussels Capital Region since 2019. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Looking at the recent development in the US, where the numbers of cases are spiking all over the country, my first question goes to Governor Hutchinson. Arkansas also sees a rise in confirmed cases right now, and you are facing a lot of pressure to completely shut down your state again. You still focus on a targeted approach. Can you explain us how that works?
Certainly. And first of all, I'm very glad to be with you today, and I'm grateful for this forum and the German Marshall Fund. It's great to be with my colleague, Governor Herbert, but also our new colleague from Belgium, the Secretary of State. It's good to be with you this morning. You know, in terms of where we are in Arkansas, our strategy in the United States has given the states a great deal of flexibility. And you mentioned that we had a targeted approach, which means that we didn't shut everything down, but that we shut down businesses that were and put restrictions on them that had face-to-face contact and they were not in the essential supply chain. Other states did a lockdown, but if you look at their lockdown, it was really allowed essential services to continue. So it truly wasn't a lockdown. It was just a broader targeting and limitation of businesses. As we brought our cases down in Arkansas, we started lifting restrictions, and we did this on a targeted basis as well. So we didn't do it all at once. It was very gradual, so we could measure whether there was any uptick in cases when we started opening back up. But you know, if you look at where we are in the United States right now, states that had severe lockdowns like California, they're having an uptick in cases. Other states that didn't have a lockdown is also having an uptick in cases. And so what are we learning from that? And that is that the virus just moves like a fog across the country, and each state has to make good decisions. And we're concentrating on our testing, our tracing, our isolation, our targeted response. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to get through this well. Our cases have gone up the last couple of weeks. They're flattening out over the weekend. And we're going to continue that strategy that we're implementing that I think will be successful in the end.
Just one more question. Are you right now rethinking the speed of your reopening, or is it just on track like you have been the last weeks?
No, we do this gradually. And so, you know, of course, we never totally shut down. And so whenever we reopened, it was a little bit easier, but we gradually lifted some restrictions. We still have not lifted all the restrictions. For example, our restaurants are open to 2/3 capacity. We're not going to put them at full capacity until we see the cases go down further. The same thing for a number of different businesses. They're just more limited in how they can open. And we're measuring them as to whether there's any cases that arise from that. And right now, our cases our cases in Arkansas are coming from many of our essential businesses that nobody can close down anyway because they're involved in this food supply. And, you know, New York needs our food supply coming from an agricultural state. So you can't stop production of it. You just have to manage that risk and make sure that when you have a positive case, you step in there, isolate it. And so we've kept our 60 food processors open based upon that. Of course, we have Walmart, an international retailer here in Arkansas. They continue to do business because they're an essential service. So I think our targeted approach makes sense for a state like Arkansas. If you have the highly dense population of New York City, you got to develop a different strategy. But that's been ours. And I think that in the end, that will be as successful as any that's worked.
Thank you. Governor Herbert, in Utah, most businesses are open since May because you also have to fight the economic downslide that followed the health crisis. How do you balance these two crises? How do you make sure that one does not get too little attention?
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be with everybody today too, Governor Hutchinson and Secretary of State Smet. Again, I think we have something to learn from each other and to share. Utah's had the challenge, like everybody else around the world, of trying to say, what is the role the government plays here? Clearly, the role that we believe we should play is one of protecting the safety and health and welfare of the people we represent. But it's not just a matter of the lives that we represent, but it's also their livelihood. And trying to find that right balance has been a challenge. Now, believe me, in Utah, we are when it rains, it pours. in the middle of this pandemic, we had a 5.7 on the Richter scale earthquake here just outside of Salt Lake City. It's the largest earthquake we've had since our state was organized in 1847 when the pioneers came here in those early days. So a major magnitude earthquake we had to deal with. I have fires right now throughout the state of Utah. We had to evacuate 250 to 300 homes just last night. So we're in the middle of some real challenges as we try to balance, what we need to do and how we come out with this pandemic overarching everything we're doing. We've done also kind of what Governor Hutchinson has said with a soft closing. We've never really closed anything down. In fact, we're listed about the third or fourth least restricted state in America today when it comes to this situation with COVID-19. We've tried to put together and have done so a plan. We got all of our best thinking in Utah together the first part of March and developed a written comprehensive plan in 4 different phases, 4 different iterations now as a dynamic plan, an action plan of what we can do to protect lives and also to protect the economy from closing down and making it even worse. And along the way, although it's been hard, I've likened it like building a bus as you're going down the freeway at 65 or 70 miles an hour, trying to build something. You've done it before, not all the parts fit, and so mistakes are made along the way. But in spite of that, we've had some pretty good results here in Utah. We have the lowest fatality rate of any of the states in America today with less than 1%. And we have the second lowest unemployment rate in America right now today. So we've been able to balance, which is what we're trying to do, kind of thread that needle and make sure that we take care of people's lives, protect them, give them good information so they can protect themselves, do what we need to do on the role of government, and rely upon the people to make good choices as we go forward. And in doing so, again, we're in a pretty good place. Now, we've had a spike in the infection rate. I blame that mostly on people becoming a little bit complacent. We've used the illustration, this is not an on-off switch. The economy is off and now it's on. We've talked in terms of it being a dial as we thoughtfully, incrementally open up the economy for less and less restrictions as we go forward. As I mentioned, we've never really shut the economy down. We've had some suggestions of what to do in a soft closing. But we need to get people's behaviors to change and more social distancing where they're in fact making sure that happens, hand sanitation, making sure that we have people wearing a face mask when they can't social distance. We now have the support and that effort of our business community, which are trying to make a safe place for businesses to operate and their employees. We have the faith-based organizations recommending to their followers this is part of their responsibility to care for your neighbor. And if you love your neighbor, then you ought to do something to make it so it's safer for them, protect the vulnerable populations. And certainly the healthcare organizations in the state of Utah, all advocating for the same thing in a coordinated fashion. So very optimistic about our future. We're going through a little bit of a challenge right now with the rising infection rates, but we've had great success the last 4 months.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, even though you have a lot of crises to deal with right now. Secretary Smet, Belgium is one of the world's most affected countries when you look at the deaths per head of population. Please tell us about the situation in Europe's capital. How hard is Brussels affected? And what are the priorities right now you are dealing with?
Yes, as you said, Belgium, compared with the number of people living in Belgium, 100,000 people, we are one of the, well, in the 15 most affected. But I want to say that we were never overwhelmed as a country. We had 61,000 people confirmed. We have 12 million inhabitants in Belgium. In the whole of Belgium, there was a little bit more than 60,000 people who are confirmed sick, of which nearly 10,000 people actually died. In Brussels itself, we had 6,300 people that were confirmed infected and something like 1,500 people that actually died. And something that we should stress is that nearly half of the people died in elderly care centers. And most of the people who died were elderly people with underlying conditions. So we were hit, and we never went in a complete lockdown like it was in Italy, or like it was in France or in Spain. People were confined at home. Teleworking was the rule. Essential business was, of course, open. Non-essential business was closed. But now we are in a complete situation going back to normal between brackets. We are kind of having a new normal, which means that telework is still the rule, but people can go to the office. Of course, then they have to keep their distance rules of 1.5 meters. People, when they use public transport, they have to use masks. It's mandatory. But when you're outside, it's not mandatory. Our restaurants, our cafes, they are open. And so society is running again. But there is a problem now coming up in Brussels, like it is coming up in Paris or in London or in other European cities. That's for many people, the new normal is looking like the old normal, in a way that they are no longer keeping the distance. People want to shake hands again. They want to hug again. They want to kiss you again on the street. You know, in Europe, sometimes you kiss like when you say hello to each other. It's kind of French habit that we have to. And so sometimes you have to fight with people to say no hugging, no shaking hands. So there is a kind of lacking of awareness, because people have a kind of real thinking that the worst is over. You should know that in Belgium, on a daily basis, we have now something a little bit more than 80 cases a day that are detected. There's a lot more of testing right now. So the situation is under control. As you know, that the borders are now open again in Europe. We can travel again. Tomorrow, the holiday season will start in the most of European countries. So people will travel again from one country to another. And so the economy is running again. And so now the big question is, how is it going to evolve in the future? And the biggest challenge at this time in most European countries and European cities is to make people aware that the virus is still there. And although the numbers are very low now in most European countries and European regions and European cities, it's still there. And so people should not relax. That's the biggest challenge that we are having right now.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of travel restrictions, I just saw the alert that the EU is still having in place a lot of restrictions for other countries, for e.g. for the US. Since Brussels is such an international city, how does the travel restrictions affect the economic recovery process?
It's very complicated for us. You know that like Washington, we are one of the most international cities in the world. That means that with being the headquarters of NATO, of the European Union, we have lots of people coming, normally flying in, flying out, but all the European Union business is nearly closed. Most people are working for the European Commission, European Council, the European Parliament. You're working from home. There are no conferences, which means that our hotel occupancy rate goes from 85% on a normal situation to 3% right now. That means that all the visitors are not there. There are no conferences. So it makes complicated for us, because the whole hotel, restaurant, and cafe sector, they are really, really affected, like the culture sector is affected. And we are all hoping that from September on, we don't have this second wave, that people will come again. Our airport never closed completely. It's now open. We are having flights more and more every day. So, but it will take a lot of time before it's going to the new normal. So it is affecting us a lot, because a lot of the low skill jobs in a city like Brussels goes to people who cater, international conferences, international meetings, and even national meetings are very downsized right now. And we are seeing it in the center of Brussels, where it is empty. Of course, the people living there, they will go out, they go to restaurants and cafes, but the tourists are not there. The international visitors are not there. So that's complicated. But I think most of the people are happy that they can go on holiday, and you're now seeing that the bookings to Spain, to Italy, they are increasing a lot. There are a lot of overbookings now on the planes, because of course there are less planes and people show up. So that means that sometimes at the airport you get some issues now of overbooked planes. But well, it starts again. So we are really hoping that we don't have the second wave, and that the international meeting, and that we stop Zooming, and that we stop WebEx, and that we meet again actually in person.
Thank you. I hope you are right. crossing the Atlantic back to the US, the decision of the EU to leave the US out of their lifting of travel restrictions, how does it affect Arkansas and Utah? I don't know which governor wants to go first. Is there something that is you have to say from your perspective?
Let me go first, Governor Herbert, on this. And, you know, Arkansas, let me put it in perspective. We have 3 million people in our state, and we had 500 cases, new cases a day over the weekend. And so I thought that might be helpful to compare with what our colleague from Belgium recited. So that's what we're looking at right now. Now that's a high point for us. We actually got up to about 700 cases a day at one point, but it's going down right now. In terms of how that impacts us, we're an international state. Even though we do a lot of food production here, again, Walmart does business in China, Europe, all over the globe. We're in and out. Tyson's Food is here in Arkansas. And then whenever you're looking at our recruitment of industry, I've got a couple of different industries that are ready to come to the United States as soon as travel restrictions are lifted, where they're going to create jobs here. So there's a lot that's on hold because of the travel restrictions. Now, I fully understand it. I think that when you're looking at a long international flight, that's challenging going back and forth. And so I think it's going to take some time before they're lifted. But that's what we've got to look forward to, because even here in the United States, if we restrict travel within our states, it really hurts us, and it hurts us even more in the same way if we restrict that internationally.
Yes, thank you. Arkansas and Utah are very similar in size. We're about 3.2 million people, and we are very international too. Part of our plan when I came into office was to expand internationally. We are uniquely suited to do international business. We speak 133 different languages in Utah. We're the most bilingual place on the planet. A lot of that's because the headquarters of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is here in Salt Lake City, most commonly known as the Mormons. Those Mormon missionaries, of which there's about 60,000 of them, go throughout the world and spend 2 years of their lives living in a different foreign land, learn the language, understand the customs and the culture, and come back loving the people. So a lot of our efforts in Utah to go out and do international business has been fueled a little bit by our ability to speak the language and know the people. We also are a believer in international trade because of the fact that as we deal with each other in a business environment, we develop trust. And it's like whether you're going down to the end of the street where you live and work with Joe's Garage and work on your automobile, you become friends with the guy, you trust the person, and you do business with them. That's the same thing that we do internationally as we work with people around the world in our international business and develop friendships, which I think helps bring stability to the world. I wish every state and every country would, in fact, engage in more international trade and business. It's worked for us, and I've got some statistics here that we understand that 95% of the customers are outside of the United States. So for our businesses here in Utah, which we have a very diverse economy, probably one of the most diverse economies in America here in Utah, our customer base is outside of not only Utah, the Intermountain West, but outside of the United States. And so there's a great opportunity out there with another near 8 billion people out there. And right now, we've led the nation in exports growth the last 2 years. We've increased our exports 35% the last 10 years. 1 in 4 jobs in Utah now is tied to some kind of international business and trade, whether that's foreign direct investment or just export imports. We have $92 billion that we're doing in trade, of which some of that comes from direct investment, and some of it comes from exporting businesses. 9% of the Utah's GDP now is lined up with export-import businesses in foreign lands. So we believe in it, and we are practicing it, and we've had great success. We've had to cut back. I do usually 2 major trade missions a year. We've had to cut those back because of the pandemic. but we're still looking to maybe go to Saudi Arabia, where we've been invited. We've had great relationships with Europe, Canada, south of the border, Latin America, just all over the planet. And we're looking to do some maybe this fall if we can open up our travel opportunities. Certainly, we're going to do them like we're doing here today with virtual tours and discussions. But I'd like to be on boots on the ground in some of our foreign lands, some of our friends, and continue to do business. That is our plan, and that's certainly our hope, and that's our goal.
Mm-hmm. 3 states that were hit very hard at the beginning, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, have announced 14-day quarantine for travelers from hard-hit states like Arkansas, and I think also from Utah. Is that something you are criticizing, or is it okay and you understand it?
Say that again.
Go ahead.
The 15 days quarantine, sorry. From New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, is it not? It's affecting Arkansas, Governor Hutchinson.
Yeah, yes, it is affecting Arkansas, and that's not helpful to us because we have a lot of interchange with New York. But you look back in February and April, whenever New York was at its height of the pandemic, we did actually restrict travel in the same way from New York to Arkansas, so that if you came back from New York, New Jersey, they had to quarantine for 14 days. So we understand that that's something they're concerned about. They don't want to jumpstart their rise in cases. But let's talk about just for a second where this is going into September. Everybody expected, one peak in the spring, and then it would slow down in the summer, and then we would have perhaps a resurgence in the fall. And we were all prepared for that. But what we've seen happen is that it's just a gradual movement of this virus across the United States. And I don't know whether we're going to have one peak that's going to gradually rise, or whether we're going to go back down here and go back up in the fall. In fact, there's some projections now that says that our peak is not going to be until September 30th here in Arkansas, which we want to beat that projection, that modeling, but that's extraordinary to think that we're going to be rising until that time frame.
The first peak.
Our first peak is what they're saying, because I don't know that we really had a first peak in April was so minimal. It looks like a small molehill compared to where we are now. And so, and when you look at the different states, you see different patterns also as to when the peaks are and the timing of the virus as it goes across, which emphasizes we all have to make some individual decisions. But in terms of the travel restrictions, in the end, we've moved beyond that. We've done away with all of our travel restrictions. We understand those in Europe, in New York, but we've got to get away from that because we're already sending into New York our food supplies. So we've sent nurses in there to help them during the pandemic. And we've got to get to the point that we're not restricting our commerce. As Governor Herbert talked about, we don't want to add to the economic crisis and hurt people's lives in that way while we're trying to actually deal with the crisis. The balance is there, and I think we're still struggling to get that right balance.
Juliane, let me just add too that I think the challenge for all of us is really the uncertainty. You're Asa talking about when's the peak going to come. There's all kinds of models out there and people looking at their crystal balls and trying to determine, what's going to happen in the future. And it really is uncertain. The best minds out there can't agree. We've had a lot of different recommendations that have changed over time of what was right and what was wrong. So we're trying to do it, as best we can, respecting that there are regional differences. We have different cultures, different politics. The 50 United States of America are not all the same. That to me is the beauty of the states. I look at what Ace is doing in Arkansas and say, he's got some good things going. I want to copy. We'll learn from our successes. We'll learn from our mistakes. We've not shut down travel into Utah. We've gone to New York and other places and sent our personnel, their medical personnel, as well as we sent some National Guard help in Washington, D.C. to help them with unique challenges they face there. When you fly into Utah, now if you came into our Salt Lake International Airport, we'd ask you to fill out a form that asks you to go through and screen yourself if you have any symptoms. And if you do, we'll take care of you and put you in a place where you can make sure that you're not sick, get you tested to see if you happen to have the COVID-19. But we allow anybody to come at any time. There's no restriction in that regard, no quarantine required, unless we find out that you were sick. Then we'd help you with accommodations to make sure that you get treatment and get better. So again, I love the idea that the United States are working together and learning from each other. We're on phone calls once a week as we learn from each other. And the National Governors Association, I think, has proven how important the separate states, little pilot programs, little laboratories of democracy that we have here throughout our country is really helping us get on top of this issue.
We already have questions from our audience, and one just fits to this, what we are just talking about, the cooperation between the states. And the question is, have you also reached out to your counterparts in Europe? Is there like best practice sharing or cooperation? Can you talk about this a little bit?
I can. Again, we've had 2 trade missions that we've had to cancel that were scheduled. But we think they're going to be delayed, I guess is probably the better way to reflect it. We're not going to be able to do it on the time frame we planned, but we are in contact with people in Canada. For example, there are neighbors to the north. We are in contact to some of our Latin America friends to the south of us. We're certainly in contact with those in the European Union. I mentioned to you Saudi Arabia, who I had the ambassadors here in my office here just about 3 months ago. We want to go there and visit with them. We have some mutual interest in energy. We have a lot of energy production here in the state of Utah. And so there's opportunities we have to share information there and learn from each other. We had plans for New Zealand and Australia. So we get around and about, but we've had to put those plans on kind of a delayed basis. But we're still are having communication. The world is, because of communication travel, really is a small place. The old Disneyland, it's a small world after all. It really is a small world when it comes to communication and transportation. We're finding with technology, like we're doing today, we can actually have good communication and dialogue, even though we're not in the same place, literally around the world. So we're going to continue to make sure we do what we can do until we can actually be in the country that we're in fact involved with.
Juliane.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Hello?
What is it?
Can I say something?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to say to the governors that from a European point of view, that we are looking very wary what is happening in the United States, that we actually don't understand it, because first you had the thing happening in China, and you can say, yeah, we got not enough information. It was not well understood. But then it came to Europe. First it hit Italy, then it hit Spain, then it hit France, and then it hit all the other European countries. And you had, in a way, an advance. I mean, you were on notice. You know that it was going to come. And then the reason why there is this travel restrictions is that we simply think in Europe that it's not under control in the United States at this time. It has nothing to do with the fact that a long-haul flight isn't safe. No, it's safe. I mean, the air in the flight, in the cabins of the airplanes, of the aircraft, it's pure. It's like an operation unit, so we don't have to be afraid of that. But the fact is that if we see what is happening in the United States, we really have this impression that it's not under control and that you lost so much time. And I think the big lesson that we have to learn from this crisis is that, okay, you may have American first. I don't agree with that policy. We should not have European first. I mean, the thing that we have to learn here is that the world has to work together. A pandemic like this shows us that the only way ahead is that European Union, United States, China, other countries, that we work together, we learn lessons, that we share information, and that we go through it together and not on its own. And so I think that's the biggest lesson that we have to learn all, even in the European Union. I mean, the first reaction in the European Union between the member states was that of isolation and was not of working together, which was a very bad response in the beginning. But now everybody understands that we have to get more Europe on the health issue, because European Union is not competent on health. They don't have this thing legally, things that they can do. But now everybody is saying, no, we have have to make our own strategic reserves. We have to share much faster information. We have to work together. We have to show much more solidarity. So my point is, to our friends in the United States, is that there is this tendency to close against the world. But I think in this point of history, we should work together. And of course, we need our strategic own reserves and get our food supplies in our own regions. I absolutely agree on that. But we have to work together and not stop the trade relations and just continue to invest in international organizations. And if they are not working well, get them better, but not quit them. I think we need the World Health Organization right now, and maybe it's not perfect in there, but let's make it perfect then, and not say, hi, we are going away. So I think a very important thing to say to our friends in the United States is we have to go and work together. Don't turn your back to us, and we won't do it to you.
Any response on the US side?
Let me jump in there, Juliane, and I want to thank Pascal for his comments there. And I agree that when you're looking at a pandemic, we all need to pull together on it. We need to share information. We need to share best practices, and we need to learn from each other. And yes, I think the World Health Organization plays an important role in that. They're not perfect as well, but they do play an important role. That's a little bit of a political discussion there, but I recognize that need to share information and cooperate together. Now, but in terms of what we've done here in the United States, we're doing the same thing you're doing in Belgium. I mean, in Arkansas, we're wearing masks. We are socially distancing as we brought people back to work. There's a requirement to wear a mask or to socially distance in the workplace. And some of the mandates are based upon what's the density of population, but we do that. We are practicing the same principles as you're doing. In terms of testing, I don't know how to compare our testing with your testing, but we've ramped up dramatically in terms of our testing capacity. This month in Arkansas, we tested 4% of our population. I don't know how that compares to your testing, but we did 4% this month. Next month in July, we'll do 6% of our total population here in Arkansas. And when we do that, then we find out how many cases you got. Our positivity rate is less than 10%. And then we do our isolation of those that test positive. So we're implementing that strategy. The only difference really is that, there is a pushback against over government regulation or mandates. And so we don't have a statewide mandate on wearing masks. We're trying to educate everybody, but it's the same strategy that we're implementing. I think where we've got to move, hopefully we'll continue the cooperation, is on the vaccine. That's what we all want. And that's going to take a worldwide effort to produce it and to make sure that it's distributed in the right way.
And Juliane, let me just add to what the governor said here, and again, Secretary Smet, I hope we're not giving the impression that we don't want to work with the rest of the world, because I certainly can speak for Utah. We have been not only wanting to do it, we've been doing it. And we can learn from each other. I echo what Asa has said here today. We're about 330 million people in the United States with 50 different subdivisions, like many countries in our states. They're sovereign. We don't all address it the same way. We have different cultures, regional differences, different politics. And so that makes it a little bit unique in how we, in fact, conduct ourselves state by state by state. I think we're trying to find ways to get through this pandemic until and unless we can get a vaccine where we can be inoculated. I don't think we're ever going to get back to normal, if there's even such a thing as getting back to normal. It may be the new normal until we have a vaccine. So we certainly want to extend our opportunities to have communication, discussion. I know that people are not going to go anywhere that they don't feel comfortable that they're going to be safe. We work with our business community and say, your employees aren't going to come to work if they don't feel like it's a safe environment. Customers are not going to come and shop unless they feel like it's a safe environment. So the social distancing, the cleaning of flat surfaces, the hygiene that's necessary, the wearing of masks. We don't have it mandated in our state either to do it by government. That's something that's kind of foreign to our politics here in Utah, most of the United States, and overreach of the federal government. But we are trying to get them to do best practices and do it because they love their neighbor, because it's the right thing to do. We have some local jurisdictions, which we've empowered to say on a local basis, local control, if they want to mandate that in a city like they've done here in Salt Lake City, they can do that. But that's their local representatives that have to answer to the people in a representative form of government. But we certainly want to listen and learn and reach out and talk and communicate and work together to solve this problem. We don't want to be isolationist.
I think one point that is really confusing me from time to time is how political the debate about wearing a mask or not has become, how partisan in the end. I was at the rally of President Trump last week, and almost nobody wore a mask inside of a building. So I'm not sure if that leave it to everyone's own decision to wear a mask or not, if that really is the right way to move forward. Are you like rethinking this, looking at the spiking of the cases?
Well, let me just say, I'm concerned about people's behavior. As I look at the spikes that's taking place in Utah, I've said I don't think we need to have more government shutdown on the economy. I think that has its own set of problems, which can be just as serious when people are out of work and no jobs. A whole set of not only livelihood problems, but mental health, suicides up, domestic violence. There's all kinds of actual problems of having not a healthy economy. I hope that we can change people's behavior. Whether you do that by the heavy hand of government saying you will change your behavior, we're going to make sure and enforce it, or can we get people to do it because it's the right thing to do because they love their neighbor? I think that's much more motivational, by the way. But we have that political logjam here in Utah and other parts of the country where people are divided on it. Compounding in my state right now is we have people running for governor. And of course, anybody running for governor would do it much better if they'd been elected than the sitting governor right now. Now, they probably would do exactly the same things we're doing, but they weren't looking for some political wedge issue to help them become the favorite of the electorate out there. But again, there's no right nor wrong. There's not really black or white. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we're learning as we go. As I mentioned, it's like building a bus on a freeway at 60 miles an hour, trying to assemble it. We've never done it before, and all the parts we've been given don't fit. We're having to, by trial and error, learn what we're doing. We get mixed information from science. We get mixed information from the healthcare people. We get mixed information from our leadership that are trying to find a way to and find out that was the dead end road. Now we've got to readjust and move in a different direction. So there's certainly a political element of it. Some of it's just the fact we don't know the answer. We're trying to find a way, and it's kind of trial and error.
Secretary Smet, are you witnessing a similar debate in Europe about wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, being on either political side of the spectrum, or is that typical American?
I think it's typical American. I think in Europe it's more like a health question. In the beginning, we had a lack of masks, and then then the message was, yeah, a mask is only helpful when you are yourself sick, and then you should wear it. And so in the beginning, there was, even in the scientific community, a little bit, they were not that keen on obliging it. But today the debate is the following. People are following the mandatory mask on public transport. If you take public transport today in Brussels, nearly everybody will have a mask. It is highly recommended in places like supermarkets, places where it's difficult to keep your distance. But there we see that it's loosening, that people are not using the mask. It's highly recommended in highly crowded places. And if you go to major shopping streets, you still see a lot of people who wear masks. But we are seeing that in 20 and 30 something, so that the young people actually, they are giving it all up. I mean, we had a big illegal, unauthorized night party in one of the big squares here in Brussels, where all of a sudden the bars closed at 1 o'clock at night. People decided to make a big rave party in the middle of the city, which of course was very dangerous. On the other hand, we had the Black Lives Matter manifestation in Brussels. There were 10,000 people, and nearly 10,000 people wore their mask. They had a mask. So it's missed. But we have now a debate going on that is to make people aware. Should we oblige to wear a mask in public places where there's a lot of people? That's a debate that's now going on, but it's a health issue. It's not a political issue. And you know, here in Belgium, lots of people are making their own masks with their own signs on it. You know, you have the chirurgical mask that you use in a hospital, but then you have this mask and the government distributed. I mean, everybody can go to a pharmacy here and you can get for free 5 government subsidized masks that you can wear. So it's a health issue, not a political issue.
Mm-hmm. We have more questions from the audience, and the next one is going to all of you. So whoever wants to jump in, feel free, please. The question is, how has the pandemic changed the social contract between citizens and governments? How can governments foster trust during crises like this? Has trust been lost, and do we have to regain it?
Juliane, let me start on this, if I might. Trust is the essential relationship between the constituent, the people, and the government. And that trust is manifested through leadership. And in times of crisis, whether you're talking about the protests because of Black Lives Matter, or whether you're talking about the pandemic, the consistency of the message, leadership, makes a very, very big difference in how people respond to it. And I do think that you will see an ongoing debate about the role of government in this type of health crisis. It is for example, our Arkansas General Assembly gave the governor emergency powers because 100 years ago we had a very similar pandemic of the Spanish flu. So the governor had significant powers to restrict business, to do whatever kind of orders we needed to protect the public health. I think you'll see that debated. Do we want one powerful executive that has that kind of power, or whether that should be more dispersed? How should that be handled? I think we've handled it very measuredly, but if I use that same power to clamp down in a harder fashion and put in mandates that people were not willing to follow, then I think that breaches the trust. I think it hurts the long-term relationship, social contract that you're speaking of. So it has to be carefully managed, and that's why you see a little bit of difference in Europe. Although I might say that the secretary from Belgium talked about what they're doing. It's very similar to what we're doing in Arkansas. It's just that there might be a little bit different response from the people, but our young people are rebelling. Our young people are going to parties, even though we are strongly encouraging just the opposite and trying to lead. And then finally, you talked about the rallies. I think you saw our vice president, when he went to a church service in Dallas, he had on a mask. And so I think you're going to see a more consistent national message because of the urgency of the current situation, that we have to be wearing masks nationally to avoid this long-term spread.
Let me just add to Governor Hutchinson's comment, because I was thinking the same thing, Asa, when the secretary was speaking. I says he could just put Utah in front of everything he said there, and that's what's happening here in Utah too. So we're not as dissimilar maybe as we sometimes think. I have emergency powers given to me by the legislature, but it's only a limited time frame. It's basically 3 months, and then it has to be extended if it's going to be extended by the legislature. So there's a check and balance on what I can say and do during emergency powers. And again, I think the concern that you I think illustrated, Asa, is if we are too heavy-handed, we end up having divisiveness that occurs, and people rebel because of the heavy hand of government. Certainly that's the politics here in Utah. It's been said that during a crisis, character is developed. And I would say that during a crisis, sometimes character is revealed. What kind of character do we have underlying? Are we willing to sacrifice for a neighbor, willing to follow common sense orders? We have some that are saying no. you can't take away my right to not wear a mask. And so that's part of the unique challenge that we're facing here in this uncertain time. But I think we're moving in the right direction. I was appreciative of the vice president, former governor, that's why he's so smart, as wearing a mask and showing by example that we all ought to be doing that as a symbol of respect for our neighbors, protecting ourselves from the virus. We're learning now that, you know, we have pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic, where people have the viral load. We don't even know they're sick. And that's why having a mask on helps them droplets and the aerosol that comes out of our mouths, our nose. Having a mask on protects others who we don't even think we're sick, and yet could be spreading the virus. So I'm a big proponent of the mask, but we've had a lot of different mixed messages coming from many people, including the World Health Organization and CDC here in America, as far as what the use of masks should be or ought to be, or what it does. And we've been on all different sides of that issue. I'm down on the side that we all ought to wear them unless we can social distance.
Mm-hmm. Returning to the point about travel restrictions and the economic impact, we have one question to Europe and to Mr. Smet. How much input do regional leaders have about decisions that are made at the federal and EU levels? So how much were you involved? Were your advice asked?
Well, you know, we have a kind of European Committee of Regions and Cities in Europe. It's a kind of advisory body to the European Commission and European Council. But basically, the main decisions were made on the national level, and when the crisis unfolded, it was more and more coordinated on the European level. The European Commission tried to do things, and now the whole issue about the travel restrictions, that is something that is being discussed between federal governments and the European Commission. And it's important to stress that the European Commission can give advice, but the final decision will always be taken by the member states, and that's under the Schengen Agreement, as you know. But I think most European countries will follow the opinion of the European Commission on that. But we, as cities or regional governments, we don't really have a say. And the thing that is now happening is that the European Committee of the Regions try to influence the European institutions on that. And if I may say one more thing about the trust issue, if you look to Europe, you see such a big difference. I mean, if you look to Germany, who did it pretty well, you see a lot of trust in Angela Merkel again. On Spain, on the other hand, you see that there are issues with the Spanish Prime Minister and the Spanish government of public trust. In Belgium, it's mixed too. So I think it often relates to the political situation already, the stability of the government, the personality of the government leaders, and as Asa said, the consistency of the message that political leaders are giving, and the clearness and the working together with the scientific community. I think it all depends on that. But I think it's very interesting to see, when lessons will be drawn, how different political leaders manage to take good decisions, like New Zealand, for instance. If you see there, then there's a lot of trust in the government over there. And in Europe, it's mixed.
Because you mentioned Germany, and I'm a German correspondent, the tracing app Germany has developed, many Germans really have it on their iPhone now, on their mobile phone. Is that something that is also like going on in other countries of Europe and in the US? So whoever wants to answer first. And
yeah, in Europe, yeah, there's a big debate in every European country, but actually nobody believes in it, really, because there are very few people that are installing it on their iPhone. Even in Singapore, that is already a country that is pretty much developed on technology and in using the phone, it doesn't really work, because people are afraid that their private information is going to the government. They don't want to share a lot with whom they spent the night, or with whom they were in a bar and things like that. So there are privacy issues, and our feeling is that in many European countries there is an app, but it isn't a big success. And I heard of all the debates, if you want the app to be a success, you need at least 60% of the population using it. Otherwise, it's useless. So we in Belgium have the debate. Is the app going to come too, like in other European countries? And then it's already a little bit strange that every country has its own app, and some cities have their own app. So that should be more standardized, I think. But personally, I'm not against it, but I think that there's a lot of reluctance of the people who to try to protect their privacy, which is understandable on one hand, but on the other hand, Google already knows today and Apple where I am. So it's always with people a little bit, how do I have to say, it's contradictory, you know. On the one hand, we give to Google, Apple, Facebook, and all these companies all our private information, even our localization. But on the other hand, when a government wants to develop an app for health reasons and security reasons, people say, no, we don't want to do that. So it will take some time, I think.
I can mirror what Secretary said. Whenever you look at the app, you know, a low usage rate in the United States because people don't trust it. And there's the distinction. They're willing to give their information to the private sector because of convenience, but they have a basic distrust, which is sort of an American principle, a basic distrust of government, that they don't want to overly give the information to the government unless necessary. And so I think that's probably, we're about the same boat as Europe is in terms of the utilization of that.
I would say that's the same thing in Utah too. I would add to that, again, there is a distrust, but I think that we all agree that testing and contact tracing are significantly important things that we need to do and do better if we're going to slow down the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And we're trying to ramp that up, do a better job of more testing, and then certainly better job of contact and tracing so we can isolate the coronavirus. That's something we need to do better.
One more question for all, so you can choose who goes first. The discussion has clarified how states and countries have sought to learn from each other and help each other. How do you envision transatlantic cooperation changing in the post-pandemic era? Is there anything that is going to be different in our transatlantic cooperation between Europe and the US after the pandemic?
I'll start there. And I think there's going to be so much different after the pandemic from how we deliver education to government services. And I think it's true in terms of our exchange of information and how we cooperate on healthcare matters as well. For example, I think that we will have to enhance the sharing of data and have more standardized processes for that, so we can deal with a pandemic in a better extent. I think you're going to have a second look at where we manufacture our pharmaceuticals, our PPE, our healthcare products. In the United States, we're so dependent upon foreign sources of supply that it's really hampered us. And I think that while we'll have increased cooperation, I do believe that you'll see a greater diversification of our supply chain on those critical healthcare needs.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I agree with Asa. I really agree on that. And the European Union should become very quickly now European Health Union too, where we take the manufacturing of all these essential medication and testing equipment and other things in European hands, and that we have enough and that we can export when other regions in the world need it. I think so. Yeah, first thing, European Union, get your act together between the member states of the European Union, and then secondly, reinforce the World Health Organization, make it better performant where it needs to be more performant, and work together.
And I think we can emerge from this pandemic stronger and better than ever. Again, a lot of it has to do with attitude, but there's certainly going to be things, as Ace has mentioned, that are going to change. We have found with the technology that we can do things and not be in the same room together. May not be quite as effective, but it certainly can be effective. We've learned our education, as we've had to close down our public education for a few weeks, that distance learning can work, and people can actually learn from their home. We have a lot more telecommuting going on now, and businesses are finding they don't need as many square feet of office building because they can have people work from home. And we have found, surprisingly so, that the production level has not dropped off, which has been the big worry. So I think we'll reemerge with kind of in a different way, utilizing the technology and what we've learned in the pandemic to improve our pathway forward as we have relationships with each other and grow the economic pie. I think we will, in fact, have some diversification. Each of us will want to be able to be self-supporting of our needs and not have to be beholden upon other people that sometimes are not as friendly. And I think in terms of the PPE challenge that we faced here in our country and having to rely upon foreign countries to provide it to us, and some would and some wouldn't, and the challenge that was there. So I think that we can come out of this actually better and stronger. It may be different, but doesn't mean it's going to be worse. And I'm really optimistic about the future.
That's almost a good closure for this discussion. I also think we probably would not have met if we all had to fly to Brussels. I'm not sure if I could have gone. So I thank you very much. Our hour is over. It was very enlightening discussing with you, even though there are probably more questions to discuss. But I'm sure we find another format to do that. And I thank the German Marshall Fund, Brussels Forum, and I wish you a very successful rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.